So let's come and gather again. It is my great joy to introduce David Hopper. He has been a student and author and teacher of the Ageless Wisdom for over 40 years. Last year, he gave a wonderful talk on the seed groups, and I went and got his book right away, which is called The Subjective Influences of the 10 Seed Groups. It's a very wonderful book that just makes it all gorgeously understandable, and it was very inspiring to read, so I recommend that. And today, David is going to share the subjective influences of 3 of the seed groups. And I just want to appreciate David in this moment because I feel like whenever he walks into a room, he carries in the energy of joy. David Hopper, welcome.
Everybody can hear me? Good. Thank you, Heidi, for that gracious introduction, of course. The title of my talk is The Subjective Influence Through 4 Seed Groups. So I'm making a slight correction. We're adding 1 seed group, yes. The bulk of my presentation will be on the influence of 4 seed groups here in the 21st century. But first, I will briefly discuss subjective activities of the Lightworkers and of all the seed groups. This is going to be a little bit. The Great Transition. Humanity is in the throes of a great transition which will herald a new and evolutionary shift in human individual consciousness, represented by the Aquarian principle of sharing. The 2 great ages of Pisces and Aquarius overlapping each other, we are entering the last years of the stage of the Forerunner, lasting until approximately 2025. The stage is all about increased activity on the inner planes between the hierarchy and the Lightworkers. Around that date, the Tibetan Dwalkul said that the hierarchy will meet in conclave to discuss the next stage of evolution for humanity. And the first stage is the externalization of the hierarchy and for the reappearance of the Christ in the world. Keep in mind that the externalization of the reappearance is in fact an externalization of higher soul values, such as cooperation and goodwill and right human relations, working out through the 10 seed groups. So what exactly is right human relations? From externalization of the hierarchy, the Tibetan says right human relations is not simply goodwill, it is a product or result of goodwill and the instigator of constructive changes between individuals, communities, and nations. In essence, this is the result of practiced love, acceptance among people, groups, and nations. I mentioned Lightworkers. Who are they? Lightworkers is a shorthand for what is called the New Group of World Servers and the men and women of goodwill. As a result, from the conclave of 1925, the masters decided that the Lightworkers should become active and be a cohesive group in carrying out the plan. Lightworkers and their activities act as a bridge between humanity, hierarchy, and the ashrams. They invoke thought forms, ideas, and impressions and turn them into creative solutions and act as a synthesizing factor for establishing right human relations in the lower 18 subplanes. Lightworkers are called the hands and the feet of the hierarchy, and they spiritualize the thought life for each of the 10 seed groups. So what is the divine plan? Antonello, of course, gave us a great description of that just in my previous talk, and other people here at this conference. But beyond all activities in the cosmic physical plane, such as the lower 49 planes, we know there is a divine plan. From a treatise in white magic, DK said, the plan is a production of a subjective synthesis in humanity and of a telepathic interplay which will reveal to man the true significance of his mind and brain and make him the master of that equipment. We won't know the plan directly until the 3rd initiation, but know it gives mankind purpose, vision, and serves as a blueprint for evolution of the lower 4 kingdoms. Hierarchy steps down the plan to the Lightworkers via impressions for applying spiritual values, ethical leadership, although they are never imposed. In a worldly context, these become a teaching on the value of right human relations and harmlessness. Society must determine at the individual and group level how these are to be implemented. Subjective influence. When speaking of subjective influence, this is a step-down energy or tension from the hierarchy in the form of impression. The objective is to bring about the unfoldment of the divine plan through the 10 seed groups. Through activities of Lightworkers, they have been setting the stage for perhaps the most powerful subjective influence emanating from the world teacher. In different cultures, he's referred to as the Imam Mahdi, Lord Maitreya, the Coming One, or the Christ. It's the same great being. Christ and the hierarchy will act as guides for humanity and not as saviors. Putting the plan, the Lightworkers, and the work of the hierarchy in perspective, there are three major aspects that act as influence and guide on the hierarchy and humanity. The first is will or purpose from Shambhala. The second is hierarchy or love. And the third aspect, humanity, represents activity or active intelligence. The three centers are closely interrelated and act as a whole and represent divine livingness. Right use of these energies by the Lightworkers will affect the behaviors of leaders in all departments of society, including the transformation of the lower 18 subplanes. As an impulse of evolution, the seed groups were first defined almost 90 years ago as a long-term experiment by the hierarchy and the ashrams. The word seed implies that it is the ashram that seeds or communicates the essence of what a specific group does and will become. With each seed group already existing in the ashrams, hierarchy intends that each group becomes a magnetic and focal point of energy with the intent of creating the same energy on the physical plane. Lightworkers and their activities help to subjectively transform civilization with the objective of impressing the plan on leaders of the 10 seed groups. Currently, the Lightworkers are active in the social, political, cultural, healing, educational, scientific, and economic fields. So here is a brief outline of the 10 seed groups as to their higher potential and what they are intended to become in the New Age. The first is seed group 1, the Telepathic Communicators. They work on the mental plane. They send and receive ideas and impressions from the masters or the ashrams to change the direction of thoughts on the lower 18 subplanes to enable a new way of communication. Seed group 2, the trained observers. Their primary objective is to dispel glamour and illusion on the astral plane. They employ right observation of events and situations and report truth. Seed group 3, the magnetic healers. They transmit healing energy from the soul's living force directly into the patient. This heals the personality and dissipates disease. Seed group 4, the educators in the New Age. Educators teach how to prepare people for developing higher values, such as teaching education for peace, and bridge the gap between the lower mind and the soul. Seed group 5, the political organizers. Workers in this group will facilitate right political and social order within civilization through the expression of the will. They help mankind to realize it's collectively part of one humanity, irrespective of nation or race. Seed group 6, workers in the field of religion. Religion in the New Age will center around man's desire to understand the divine life by subjectively approaching and seeking at-one-ment with it. Seed group 7, the scientific observers. They apply mental understanding to the laws of nature and study the motivating energy that penetrates the outer forms and the one who creates the new forms as expression of the inflowing spiritual life. Psychologists in the New Age, seed group 8. They work with the revelation of the soul, leading to the revelation of divinity in humanity. Seed group 9, the Financiers or Economists. They work with the Aquarian principle of sharing and the right allocation of monies and resources at the soul level. And the final seed group, number 10, called the Creative Workers. They link and blend life and form creatively by synthesizing words, color, music, from many diverse sources to create manifestations of beauty. And I left this little short outline in the bookstore by my books, which you can see later. Although all of the 10 seed groups are currently exist and have influence on the physical plane will be examining elements of the 4 most active seed groups that are promoting change toward the unfoldment of the next stages of the plan. The seed groups I'll be touching on will be Seed Group 1, the Telepathic Communicators, Seed Group 2, the Trained Observers, Seed Group 5, the Political Organizers, and Seed Group 9, the Financial or Economists. So with Seed Group 1, Telepathic Communicators, they're focused on the plane of mind where they receive ideas and impressions from the soul and from the mind of the master to implement goodwill, right human relations, and harmlessness in all their activities. This all enables human progress and helps individuals and groups to participate in the unfoldment of the plan. This represents an evolution in consciousness, not just for individuals, but for groups and nations. Their work has the goal of changing the direction of thoughts and bringing balance to emotional and mental energies on the lower 18 subplanes. Externalization of the hierarchy, Alice Bailey, or the Tibetan wrote, Group 1 can telepathically influence leading people and speak to their minds so that they may be impressed with the need which has been described by the great ones as the loving salvage of the world. They must be led to realize that their policies must be determined for world good. Telepathic communicators influence the national conversation about how society thinks, feels, and acts in the world. This conversation is happening on the mental plane around the world. To illustrate this point, let's look at the following movements. The Me Too movement. This movement is about calling out the patriarchal bullying, chauvinistic male energies, and ending sexual harassment of women and girls being treated as unequals. Internationally, pressure is also growing to allow girls and women equal access to education, such as in the Islamic and Indian cultures. Racial equality or the civil rights movement. The issue is around allowing the same rights in a material and cultural sense to all peoples regardless of race and ethnic heritage. The higher thought forms in public conversation are acceptance and tolerance, unity and brotherhood. The environmental movement. This movement is about the concept that man is interconnected and interdependent with the earth and all its kingdoms. People and groups working around the world are using the TV, the internet, blog sites, and social media to bring awareness of the dangers of destruction of habitats, deforestation, overpopulation, climate change, and pollutions by individuals, governments, and corporations. From an esoteric point of view, these movements are not just physical plane issues, but thought forms and conversations of how society needs and should be responsible for its own well-being and all the kingdoms on the planet. The influence of think tanks and lobbyists. Think tanks are institutions with experts from government, economy, and science. They research and produce analysis for providing background and policy on how issues should go forward in government and industry. Their work constitutes concretized thought forms that influence politics, economics, education, science, media communications, and healthcare. Between the United States and Europe, there are several thousand think tanks. In Washington, D.C. alone, there's over 30,000 lobbyists, each with a measure of influence on the government through their thought forms. Today, many of these ideas are discussed by politicians and economists, which originated from think tanks or lobbyists who influence the leadership of all the seed groups, although they exist with largely crystallized and astrally charged thought forms that are often biased toward conservative or liberal values. To help heal the rifts in politics and offset these crystallized thought forms, members of the New Group of World Servers, or the Lightworkers, must come forward and provide nonpartisan ideas to submit to politicians and economists to define new conscious and life-giving way forward. I'll talk more about this a little later in my talk. Seed Group 2, the Trained Observers. Primary objective of the trained observer is to dispel glamour and illusion on the astral plane by bringing light into dark places. This allows direct knowledge, truth, understanding, and right interpretation of events to be clearly seen and known. To do this work, the trained observer withdraws from the center of activity of events on the lower 18 subplanes. He then radiates truth into the plane of illusion and glamour and releases the thought form of separation. This, of course, is the ideal. Example of the trained observer in today's world is the activity of the journalist. He takes thought forms already in the national conversation and openly discusses them dispassionately and objectively, with the intention of presenting facts about a person or situation using various technologies such as TV, social media, and the internet. Referring to the function of the media within society, in 1971, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black commented, "In the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Founding Fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. Government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people." In addition, many are also using the media to spread higher truths and values through podcasts, webinars, and conferences, such as through this very conference. However, the opposite occurs by those who have the intention of spreading lies and deception, thus subverting truth. Deception in the news, the post-truth era. Media outlets of today's world have pundits or talking heads. Their purpose is to be representative of a national conversation by objectively analyzing and talking about current issues from different angles. However, many of the pundits strive to give objective reporting, but certain news organizations often editorialize or place undue divisive or distorting overtones on the news instead of reporting it dispassionately and objectively. This type of news broadcast is not interested in facts, but wanting to promote an emotional response in the viewer. This type of news is called post-truth. This type of reporting can be traced back to the 1920s, where Edward Bernays, the founder of public relations, also the nephew of Sigmund Freud, wrote books on how to influence society and public opinion using advertising, images, words, slogans, and news headlines. He used techniques to influence individuals' free will, thoughts, fears, and desires for economic or political gain. In the decades that followed the American Tobacco Company, the CIA, advertisers, and politicians took notice and profited at the expense of the public. In short, the trained observer needs to insulate him or herself from the glamours and illusions by being well-read, practice discernment and discrimination with information from whatever source it is revealed. Trained observers have left an influence on how journalists and individual thinkers deal with corruption and deception in government, expressed through newscasters who are posing questions, fact-checking, challenging anybody that is not practicing integrity and transparency. Discerning truth. The essence of what the trained observer does is communicate truth. So what is truth? Here's one definition from Google. Truth is right understanding and interpretation of information, of events, that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality, such as a scientific truth. Overall, it is the opposite of a falsehood. The forces of deception. We understand that lightworkers are aligned with the evolution. They are aligned with the evolution of consciousness, but those who are aligned with lies and deception are facilitating the work of the dark forces or the forces of involution. This focus will keep humanity stuck in the lower 18 planes. From externalization of the hierarchy, the Tibetan says the forces of darkness, or the Black Lodge, are powerful energies bringing blindness to the peoples and to feed steadily the existing fires of hate, separateness, and criticism. Hence, they are the forces of crystallization, and they hold back the forces of evolution, of progress for their own ends. A person who is soul integrated will know what is truthful. Much of today's media is filled with deception, lies, fake news, and untruths. With a near constant barrage of deception in the media, people see this misinformation as a distraction and believe it as truth and reality. However, Lightworkers realize this deception is the work of forces who do not want humanity to progress and thus stall or put off the implementation of the plan. Continuing on the tactics of the Black Lodge, here are some examples of their activities. When new or positive initiatives, such as providing equal rights or health care to minorities or women or enacting environmental regulations to counteract pollutions, the Black Lodge counters with doubt to maintain the status quo and keep power to thwart change. This is in reality an attack against aspirants in putting out more evolved thought forms. By their actions, this results in all that is nurturing, protecting, and life-giving is blocked. Climate change. The United Nations and most countries of the world have conducted scientific studies and conclude the world is already experiencing the effects of severe climate change. However, here in the United States, many conservatives say climate change is a hoax, that science is neither there nor it's ambiguous. Upon entering office in 2017, President Trump relaxed regulations that regulate the coal and oil industries, allowing them to essentially pollute at will. Interestingly, that separate reports from the Pentagon, the CIA, NASA, NOAA, and the Advisory Committee for the Sustained National Climate Assessment created under President Obama in 2015 run counter to the politics of the conservatives and acknowledge the world's climate is changing. All the reports indicate climate change will affect national security, the U.S. economy, and it will kill thousands of Americans unless measures are taken. C Group 5, the political organizers. Tibetan describes them as organizers, inferring that workers in this group will facilitate right political and social order within civilization through the expression of the will, which is an aspect of Shambhala. Both Shambhala and the hierarchy impulse the energy of will, mainly with the objective of bringing cohesive relationships between nations for demonstrating how the divine will works out in consciousness. Since World War II, we've seen this play out internationally through the continual tendency toward the creation of international unity through political, cultural, and economic alliances. Although great progress has been made toward world unity, the energy of will or mental powers are still largely focused on the inner and outer planes toward selfish and destructive ends, such as currently exists with Russia, North Korea, China, and Syria. Here in the United States, the selfish expression of will is focused through legislative leaders whose interest and allegiance are only to conservative or liberal values. Both parties and leaders are only looking towards their base in the next election and not the nation or the people they're supposed to serve. Because of this mindset, conservative versus liberal values, with very little left in the middle for compromise, national problems on immigration, repair of infrastructure, and educational reform, to name a few, become stalled. It would seem that a clear line of cleavage or demarcation, as was brought up before as a subject, is crystallizing so that the forces at hand are quite clear. As a result, the frequent calls for bipartisanship and cooperation between parties, a strong sixth-ray energy of separatism exists in the U.S. political system. The day of crisis, with the incoming seventh ray of synergy, political organizers are being impulsed to awaken mankind through the expression of goodwill and that it is collectively part of one humanity, irrespective of nation, race, or color. In Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, page 746, the Tibetan state's hierarchy's intention is to bring about the day of crisis, through this crisis in which the aspiration of humanity for peace, understanding, goodwill, and truth can be raised to its highest expression. By the downpouring of desire of the spiritual forces of the hierarchy and the Christ and all associated with them. The Tibetan goes on to say this depends on the responsiveness of spiritual impression, spiritual fusion, and understanding and cooperation and goodwill in the spiritual workers. The need for statesmen and visionary leaders. In order to transition to the new leader, the current vacuum of leadership existing in basically the Western nations must be guided by statesmen and visionary leaders to lead the way. What makes a person a statesman or a visionary leader? True statesmen within society would most likely be a high-functioning disciple or initiate and would be able to simultaneously see the big picture and the plan and how their country can enact great change within society. Statesman or visionary leader rises above partisanship and the limitations of nationalism. He or she holds a theme of unity and oneness and represents the higher ideal and welfare for his or her nation. In the last 80 years or so, we've seen Eleanor Roosevelt, Nelson Mandela, Mikhail Gorbachev, Golda Meir, and Churchill, to name a few, who have had a positive transformative influence and a greater vision for their respective countries. On very practical levels, this allows for the bringing together of the diverse forces of politics, finance, culture, education, science, and religion into a higher realization and common cause. Crisis of perception. From another perspective, for decades, humanity has been developing through all the seed groups. Although great scientific, economic, and political success have ensued, it has come at great expense to humanity and the planet. Because of our global problems are so acute, we have reached a crisis of perception. We now realize as individuals, as groups of nations, that we are living systems existing within other systems and thus influence each other. Our challenge is to learn how we can integrate cooperatively with other groups, share a common vision, and realize how our livingness connects and influences other people and things. This can lead to a world unifying vision that embraces all peoples, nations, and cultures. It seems like the political organizers group is best suited for creating a new vision, for defining a foundation for a shared vision in humanity. This will require people like statespersons or visionary leaders to come forward. It is important to realize that from an esoteric teachings, we understand that the path of human spiritual growth evolves from the individual with separative and selfish tendencies towards group awareness of unity and oneness. The statesman or visionary leader is ideally focused toward group awareness, that is, for the community, the nation, or the globe as a whole. Visionary leader fosters shared values of diversity and other commonalities within the community and sees the community and nation as one with no separation. They may speak of our nation, our world, one people with shared values. They would recognize that all people would be recognized as equal in origin and no group has a power over another. The objective of the statesperson is to facilitate the establishment of right human relations with justice, universal rights, and opportunity for all through right education. This would create, ultimately, a new world order where people would come together to recognize that the natural resources of the planet belong to no one individual nation or corporation, but should be shared by all. A new vision for humanity. What would a new vision look like even if this only represents a partial part of the plan to be implemented? I believe that we are seeing this through what might be called spiritual think tanks. Two such organizations come to mind: the Foundation for a Shared Vision in Humanity and the Center for Evolutionary Leadership. Both are working collaboratively with leading evolutionary thinkers such as Deepak Chopra, Gene Houston, Bruce Lipton, Stephen Dinan, Sandra de Buffington, Greg Braden, and many others. Their purpose is to pool their collective knowledge and wisdom to create new methodologies for developing new types of leaders, for designing and building evolutionary organizations and institutions with ethical actions and leadership, and to help build a sustainable world. It's great that these evolutionary leaders are collaborating and coming up with innovative ideas that can help to transform society. But it seems the next step is for people of these spiritual think tanks to talk to people that are work directly in the existing 10 seed groups, or the sectors where the seed groups are, such as the politicians, the economists, people in broadcasting, CEOs of corporations, scientists, and educators, and begin to have their ideas heard and adapted. On another note, perhaps we don't even need visionary leaders to create influence, but with a sense of the plan, we ourselves, as esotericists, can articulate how right-human relations should be enabled within a given seed group. Of those of us who are aligned, we can find ways of bringing higher vision and spiritual values to leaders of the existing 10 seed groups and their subordinates. This can be done by identifying those who represent higher vision and values, contact and support and uplift them in their work. Keep in mind that the new group of world servers, or the Lightworkers, that is us, are the hands and feet of the hierarchy and represent the first externalization of soul values. Humanity needs to hear new and innovative ideas for giving hope and new direction, different from the vitriol or the selfishness and separatism and war which currently dominates the headlines. For creating a new vision, the telepathic communicators, the political organizers, scientific observers, and economists, financiers, together with members of the spiritual think tanks, can develop and help develop a new vision for solutions to tackle humanity's problems. Seed Group 9, Financiers or Economists. A central premise for the financial seed group, as the Tibetan also calls it, will work with the Aquarian principle of sharing at the soul level. Principle of sharing centers around the sharing of material wealth, money, and resources. They will see money as a valuable potential energy to be shared for the benefit of all humanity. With the coming New Age, this group will oversee the redistribution of wealth and directionalize money and resources to create an economic system to facilitate equality and abundance. Challenge is also about the distribution of funds and resources being invested wisely to create more wealth and abundance in a responsible and non-reckless manner. Today, much of the financial seed group is driven by power, greed, and the need to own possessions and material wealth. Humanity must awaken to the realization that glamour of materiality drives the system of capitalism. A new vision must help solve issues around overpopulation, sustainability, and the redistribution of wealth and resources. In today's world, there is a possible seed for the future about how wealth is distributed, such as through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who focus on improving people's health, mainly in third world nations, by giving them the chance to uplift themselves out of hunger and extreme poverty. And there's also the Responsible Wealth Project, which is made up of business leaders, investors, and inheritors who believe that the growing inequality is not in their best interest nor in the best interest of society. In the last 30 years or so, many people in the business world are developing an awareness around money as energy, implementing ethical business ideas and practices, and changing the awareness around investment. They're seeing money as a spiritual asset. And this is an understanding about how to attract money and to make vision become successful. Basic concepts included honoring money as an energy and a spiritual asset, becoming magnetic and attractive, thus enabling the law of attraction, having an attitude of generosity with both time and money. Perhaps this is our greatest asset. It is the knowingness and connection with our own soul to function as a guide for enabling the plan. There's also the concept of practicing enlightened and ethical leadership and behavior in business by enacting principles of honesty, fairness, equality, dignity, diversity, and individual rights before monetary gains. These principles create trustworthy corporate citizens and employees in an ethical culture within the organization. This would act as a forerunner for enabling right human relations. And we see this happen with special training activities that are going on with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, IBM, Apple, Electronic Arts, and many other IT organizations. And there's also the concept of changing awareness around investment, which can include crowdfunding. And this can help individuals and groups raise money for nonprofits, for an example. Or making microloans to individuals. We see this happening in Asia and Africa as an example. The Women's Microfinance Initiative, loans come from small banks, and which are organizations are organized at the grassroots level. In the political sector, there's a consciousness around the source of donations from private investors as an ethical consideration, especially monies going to politicians and political parties. In the United States, this is represented as dark money. This relates to full accountability and transparency in the political and economic systems. Also, the Financial Seed Group works with the Political Organizers Group in holding an attitude of establishing peace and eliminating the causes of war. This can be done by directionalizing or changing the direction of monies away from war-making industries toward more humanitarian pursuits, such as investment in education, eliminating poverty, and healthcare, making healthcare and medicine available for all. However, regarding the activity in recent administrations, servers of this concept see this as a seed for the future. Know thyself. As I look out on you, people attending this conference and on live stream, I recognize many of you are teachers and are essentially leaders in your own esoteric specialty as you touch others with your knowledge. You are providing your own influence on people as members of the New Group World Servers. In your own realm, you are helping to manifest your part of the plan. However, with so much glamour and illusion in the world, our hearts and minds are sincerely impacted when we tune into the news. It should be said that if we want to manifest and enable this brave new world, we must become agents for change ourselves. This requires us, the esotericists, to be clear of who we are when engaging people and situations. I suggest performing a self-assessment about how we express our own soul qualities in the world by employing the concept of know thyself. From this work, we must have courage, be vigilant, and always be aligned with higher vision toward enabling the plan. As I mentioned before, we can look at the rules and commandments of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali as a guidepost, such as practicing harmlessness by speaking truth through right use of speech. We can put aside our lower mind biases to contact the soul for discovering truth and inspiration. Within the mind, it must be telepathically sensitive in two directions. That is, the world of the souls and the world of men. This is similar to using the esoteric sense where we both live subjectively and overtly in the world. Lastly, I would boldly suggest that it is for those of you who are so motivated, find ways of bringing the higher vision and spiritual values to leaders of the existing 10 seed groups and their subordinates. This can be done by identifying those who represent the higher vision and values, contact and support and uplift them. Keep in mind that the New Group of World Servers or the Lightworkers, that is us, are the hands and feet of the hierarchy and represent the first externalization of soul values. In conclusion, there is a thought form for showing divine purpose in all that we do. We as Lightworkers must see, understand, and identify with the flows of energy and force in ourselves and our world to initiate change. Our place in evolution is to shift what is happening in the collective. By allowing the creative intelligence to flow through us in powerful ways, we Lightworkers need to have courage and evoke new ideas to confront the entrenched dark forces with light and goodness, driven by higher spiritual values, namely cooperation and goodwill. We must continue to be focused with our service work and be open to the impulses of the soul and the hierarchy, without getting lost in the partisan politics of separative consciousness. This is a call and appeal for us to use our creative energies for supporting right human relations in all our activities and relationships across the seed groups. Major problems confronting humanity will not be overcome unless we have leaders with vision or courage. We, the Lightworkers, must always be on the lookout and empower those people who show the way forward, espouse humanity, one humanity, and enable right spiritual values and negate separatism. We are planetary co-creators living in a quantum potential. We are living on an evolutionary edge. A planetary culture of wisdom and peace is our potential. Together as a group in touch of at least a sense of the plan, we, the Lightworkers, can and must dispel disharmony and bring beauty and conscious awareness to all we do. Thank you.